Hello, hello.
Hello, hello. How are you?
Doing all right. A little bit sick, but doing all right. How about yourself?
Oh no, hopefully it's over with for the holidays.
Yeah, hopefully. Well, and honestly, this is absolutely fine with like I got COVID like a month or so ago. That was rough. This is fine.
Mhm. Yeah. I'm good. No sickness, luckily.
Good.
Cool. Okay. I'll get us started.
You had mentioned that Luke was going to join us. Is he coming today or not today? Just curious.
Um, oh, I haven't actually heard from him. I think it's probably a no.
Cool.
Um, yeah, yeah, I don't know. I'll see later if this meeting time works for him. I thought it would, but maybe there might be some other clash he has.
Mm. I'm not stressed. I was uh just curious.
Ah, yeah, all good. Cool. Okay. Welcome guys to the meeting on the 10th of December, 2024. Probably the last one of the year, given the holidays coming up. Um, First things first is the antitrust policy. Cool. Okay. Anything from you, James, on something you want to add to the agenda or anything like that? This is what I have so far.
Yeah, I can give an update on the pickup protocol v4 as mentioned there, and um, I guess I have uh, two topics of I'm presently working on the framework and architecture broad scopes could run some things by you that could be helpful in that effort. Um, So I guess put a line item for the framework and that I could ramble at that point.
Cool. All right. I'll get through some of the obvious stuff. Um, we did the 0.66 release. It had been a while since we'd done a release, a couple months, few months. A while actually. Um, Anyway, this release primarily includes that removal of the Indie SDK. Um, and forgive me, I haven't actually formatted this in a nice way like you've done, James. Let me just compare them. Yeah, yours are a lot prettier. Um, Maybe I should try and fix that up. Anyway, yeah, so that had the Indie SDK removal. It had a bunch of random did fixes I'd done while working on did resolution stuff. Believe it well, as well, it includes the did JWK implementation for resolving and converting to and from keys to did JWKs. Um, yeah, so glad that's out. We're consuming that anonymity and it seems to be working fine. Um,
Woohoo! Again, the like I'm really glad that the indie SDK is out of the project. So thank you for doing
yeah,
that.
all good. Goodbye, farewell to Indie SDK. Yeah, we've closed off this issue now. But yeah, long time coming. Glad it's done. Um, and what else has been going on since then? We got the did checked, did resolver merged in. So yeah, this lets you resolve DIDs on the check network natively through their gRPC, which is basically these protobuf servers that they have running on all their checked nodes. They let you query for DIDs and resources directly through them. So it's a bit different to approaches we're maybe used to with, ZMQ talking to multiple indie nodes and trying to get consensus between them, which is, I believe, how, you know, sovereign or unqualified or indie did resolution is done. Um, so yeah, this approach is a bit different, but all in all, it matches what Credo TS does, which is what I was primarily basing this off. Um, and the other thing that was included in this, and I covered a bit here, I was finding that the did web resolver that we have wasn't quite working on Android and most likely wasn't working on iOS devices either. Um, that was mostly just because of old libraries being used, and their older versions didn't really have the TLS support that we needed. Did web, of course, uses HTTPS, so there was some TLS issues. Anyway, those are fixed now, and at least from my testing, it was working on Android devices. I haven't tried iOS devices, but I can't see why it wouldn't work. Um, so yeah, that's the did resolver, and the other one in review. And I've tagged you, James. But yeah, I'll go over the details quickly. So this PR is basically adding a non-creds object resolver for check. So this builds on top of the did resolver and tries to implement the non-creds method that checked is defined. Um, yeah, so we already had this non-creds ledger read trait existing in this Aries-vcx ledger, and there was one implementation with sort of two variants of that implementation. So the existing implementation we had was, of course, for indie-based a non-creds object, so querying indie ledgers to pull objects. And we sort of had two variants. One was directly to the node via ZMQ or indie VDR. And the other was doing the indie VDR proxy, which is, I believe it was something that the ABSA guys were using internally, and perhaps that was their motivation. But yeah, they had some proxy client they were implementing with this trait. Um, but anyway, so this PR is all about implementing this trait for checked, so you can resolve checked objects. And James, are you familiar with this trait?
Yes, in that I am not intimately familiar, but I have looked at it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Cool, cool, cool.
Did
Um,
the did you have to adjust the trade at all, or is it a was it a fairly straightforward did it fit did the checked fit into that trait appropriately, if that makes sense?
um, yes, I did have to change it a bit. But my perspective is that Indy wasn't fitting the trait well.
Ah,
And that tech
fair.
has corrected the trait into what it should be. Um, yeah, anyway, so yeah, this is the trait, right? So it's got sort of existing methods that you'd expect. You can get schemas, and this is all well typed using that fork of a non-creds RS types. You might recall many months ago we talked about using this a non-creds types crate and how we sort of have a fork of it. And there was questions of, oh, should we move to just pure non-creds RS, yada yada.
Mhm, mhm.
Anyway, so it's well typed with those types, checking schema ID, etc. So it has sort of the methods that you'd expect: get schema, get cred def, just fetching those non-creds objects. Um, and so I needed to make the checked implementation fit into this. So these ones were easy, schema and cred def. Checked, essentially the way it works is, are you familiar with did linked resources, James?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so they've implemented as resources that are immutably permanently stored on the checked ledger under a DID, as in under the issuer of that resource or object. It's stored as a resource under them. And those resources, when you resolve them, they have metadata of name, type, created, yada yada, and then the actual content, which is where you'd find, yeah, in the content you find sort of a JSON version of these anon-creds objects. Um, not exact replicas of these objects. Sometimes a field will be missing, like issuer ID doesn't need to be there because it's implied by the resource owner. But pretty
Ah,
close to these objects. But I'll get back to that in a second. Um, so yeah, what I had to change in this trait to make it work is this trait is primarily, and again, this is the read trait, right? So we're mostly looking at
yep,
holders and verifiers using this trait. There's also a write trait, not this one, but there's another write trait, which is for issuers primarily. Yeah, so what I had to change is going from deltas or going from just reading of revocation registry deltas, which is an indie concept, I believe, or at least it has origins in indie and that's where most of its usage is. And adding support to fetch a revocation status list, which, as you'd know from that issue I'd created, is sort of the newer approach for
yeah,
getting sort of the revocation state. Um, and yeah, so I basically just had to add this trait method to directly get the revocation status list because this is the language that checked uses revocation status list. They don't have any form of deltas. Um, and I think this is the language we should be using based
yep.
off the movement of the anoncred spec towards this. Um,
Do
yeah,
we want to keep the um delta methods still? Like
I
if
don't.
the non-creds RS is moving towards status list, do we need to actually even keep the deltas?
I think we should remove them. Um, yeah. Specifically, I think once you remove that get revreg delta method, you'll see a bunch of things break and then sort of follow the trail of removing all mentions of deltas and replacing them for statusless. So I think that should happen. I didn't do it in this this PI here because
Yep.
it starts touching issuer and verifier stuff as well.
Right,
Um,
because you have to
but
do
what,
the other corresponding half of actually creating it's part of the revocation piece, which is issuer verifier side.
yeah, yeah. So I'd have to adjust this ledger write trade as well, which, as you can see, there's mentions of deltas in there as well. And there's also the non-creds trait we have. So this is the ledger related trait, but there's also the non-creds trait we have, which is also primarily focused on deltas at the moment. Um, so I think it's better for a separate PR than to try to do it in this. It'd sort of get,
Agreed.
yeah, out of scope a bit.
But
But
then
what I
for
did do,
but we do want to do it because the only impact really is that you won't be able to talk to ledgers that don't support the newer status lists, if I understand correctly. Um, which is I think acceptable from my perspective that get your ledger to be upgraded if it's not.
yes, yes, it's mostly true, but for something like the indie ledger, um, yes, it works in terms of deltas. So when you're building up a revocation state to do a presentation, you're fetching essentially you're fetching the delta from zero or the start of the revocation entry up until some specific timestamp that you're trying to prove that you weren't revoked at.
Yep.
Usually that's present, but it could be anything, could be any timestamp. Um,
Yep.
and then you're actually taking that delta and then you're transforming it into a status list just so that you can pass it into a non-creds RS. Um, which is it's a little awkward because yeah, the indie ledger doesn't work in terms of status lists, but you can still convert from deltas to status lists if that delta is from the start of time until now.
Mm,
I hope that makes sense because deltas are from X to Y time, whereas status list is the full status at Y. Um, yeah.
yeah. Um, so I guess it, so theoretically, I guess there's a slight use case where you could have slightly more uh fine grained control if you used a delta, except for where the best practices for using with indie is to do from zero until whatever time you're caring about,
Mm.
versus something uh uh different from that, which matches the status list behavior, if I understand correctly.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
I think you're right. There's some use cases in Indie for deltas that I don't really understand. But I think they are out there, but I'm not sure if we're using them or if anyone's using them.
Well,
Um,
given that the non-cred spec has moved to using uh, status list, right?
mm.
I think it would make sense to me to adjust our uh, dump deltas, go to status list entirely on our end, especially because
Yeah.
I'm not aware of anybody who's using VCX who needs deltas specifically.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Exactly. And I think basically this issue I made about doing the transition, this would put us in line with, the credos of the non-creds world. So I think credos implementation sort of cuts out deltas, at least from the exposed APIs, that
Yep,
they're using resolving deltas under the cover
yep,
for for indie stuff,
yep,
but
yep.
exposing it as
That could be
status.
the indie implementation of this trait, not the trait exposing deltas.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, anyway, so this is the main method I added. And part of this PR as well is switching all of the holder logic to use this instead of this. So from the holder's perspective in VCX, the holders fully transitioned to using statusless
Mhm.
um, and away from deltas. And that was only really in a couple places I had to change that. So
Do
that worked out.
you do we need those? Can we remove the delta functions from this trait then?
No, sorry. It's because the verifier is still using this in a couple places.
Ah, got it. I see. Yep. Okay.
Yeah. So I wanted to get rid of it. That was my goal, but a bunch of other things broke and I didn't want to go down
Well,
that rabbit hole.
I would rather do multiple smaller PRs. I just thought I was like, wait, it sounds like you did everything for it, but I is not quite on
No,
it. So
only for the for the holder specific flows.
that's all we
Um,
really care about, anyways, right?
yeah, exactly.
Uh,
Um, Yeah, so like to give you a glimpse, here's like how I adjusted the indie VDR implementation of that ledger trait. So we're adding in this method and we're getting the delta from zero to the timestamp, and then we're converting that delta into a status list, um, which this conversion function is something we already had. And I believe I've seen it before in Creator, and yeah, they have similar conversions going on. Um, anyway, so that's what it looks like. the bad side is that in the checked implementation of this non-creds resolver, since that function for retrieving the delta still exists, I just had to basically throw an error whenever someone calls this. And, this is motivation for us to remove this.
Oh,
Um,
right. So if they call the trait, because the trait still has it, you needed to have the implementation and still have a function that gets called, so throw an error. That totally makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, if you try to use the checked and non-creds method, this implementation of checked and non-creds with a verifier stack, for instance, that verifier is probably still going to call in this method, so you're going to get an error. Uh, and then you're going to go, that error sucks. Let me look at this GitHub issue, fix it immediately, and we'll get a good contribution from someone.
Is there a because I haven't looked at it, is there a standard way for from a Rust perspective of indicating a deprecated feature? Like, is that something that is a tag that can be applied or a doc flag that can be applied?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Good idea. I'll have a look at that. I believe there is.
Cool. I suppose even if there wasn't a standard way, I think we should do it, even if it's a. I've been really impressed with Rust's documentation, testing, like all of it I love Rust. The more I work with it, the more I have been really enjoying the whole ecosystem and language and stuff. So
Yeah, yep. No, me too, brother. Um, yeah, I'm just trying to figure out here what I can tell you to ease the blow when you have a review of this. Yeah, like the implementation of the checked resolution for schemas and cred defs, they're pretty straightforward. These ones would just the schema ID is literally like a uh, a resource ID. So you just need to resolve that resource.
mm,
Those resource IDs are did URLs. So happy we had this typing for it already. So yeah, these ones are pretty simple. It's directly resolving it, and I'm resolving it into these like thin shims, which are like what data is actually on ledger. So this is what I was mentioning before. The data is pretty much the exact same as the well-typed a non-creds RS types. However, they're missing some things like issuer ID. Uh, so we just need a intermediate conversion into that and then convert it into the non-creds RS type, like so. Um, so yeah, schema, cred def, rev definitions. I sort of hate these names, by the way. This is a one thing that they're still called JSON. But anyway, future problem. Anyway, they're sort of straightforward conversions. The more difficult one is the status list, which is where we start using did linked resource queries. So we're essentially saying, let me resolve any resource you have for this did, as long as it has this type, this name, and was present at this point in time, right? So this is where you're querying for a status list at a point in time. Um, so yeah, these two things together are sort of a type and name or like a way to uniquely identify the collection of those status list updates. And then when you
right.
give the version time, you're saying of that collection of status list updates, find me the update which was at or just before this timestamp.
Right.
And we talked about how most of the time in a non-creds, you're requesting a presentation that it's not revoked right now, right? So this timestamp would be now. However, you can request that you're presenting a valid credential from a week ago and things like that. Prove to me that when you got this speeding ticket, your driver's license wasn't revoked, and maybe you got the speeding ticket 2 weeks ago. That's the
Yep.
use case I would imagine. Um, yeah, so this is resolving by a query instead of a direct reference. And then what you'll see as well, so part of this work was to add resource resolution to the checked did resolver,
Mhm.
which is what you reviewed in the previous MR. Let me see. Yeah, so I added a method for resolving resources as well. There's so many different ways that you can query for resources. So the one I just covered was either directly by the full URI, um, like so, or by name and type, and maybe a time as well, like so. Um, yeah, so there's many ways to do the resolution, and there's way more parameters that you can add in here as well. But just for this initial resource resolution, I'm just supporting these sort of simple parameters: resource type, resource name, version time. But there's a whole rabbit hole you can go down. This is what
Yeah.
Credo did well. They supported these parameters because it's what they needed for a non-creds resolution. And until there's, a use case to go beyond that, it seemed reasonable. Um,
Agreed.
yeah, so yeah, this resolver is either doing it by the exact reference, so it's on resource path, or it's pulling out the parameters and then doing resolution based on those parameters, trying to find the best match given the name type and time. Anyway, um, hopefully that makes sense.
Yep.
Um, what else can I share? I think that's it really. Um, so yeah, like internally, at Anonymy, I was able to test this out, this branch against essentially Check's been working on this branch of Akapai, Falcon branch of Akapai, where they've been adding in checked did and a non-creds resolution and registering. So they've actually added in support for, writing checked dids, writing checked resources, writing checked the non-creds, and resolving it. So I've been testing against like their checked issuer and verifier of a non-creds, and it's working fine. And I also tested it against Credo TS as well, because they have the full stack of checked support already.
Mhm.
Um, they have for a while. Pretty impressive. Um, yeah, so that's working fine. You'll see as well there's some system tests in there as well, integration tests. Um,
Nice. That's one thing that I want to try and uh, make sure we're staying on top of is tests, especially when we add code, you know.
yeah, 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 exactly.
Are the
Very much.
tests you're doing, are they actually reading against the actual checked ledger, or is it doing more like unit testing level?
They are actually calling the ledger. There's some unit tests which I use to sort of test some of the error cases. But then I have some ledger calling tests, which this might bite us eventually. Say if we have 100 PRs open at once, because VCX is, the hot new framework in town. We have 100 PRs open at once, and all of them are running the CI, and all of those CIs are trying to do resolution of check bits as part of the testing. Then, we might start hitting some limits on these resolvers.
Yep.
So it could bite us.
Would
Not
it
sure how
make
else I can.
sense to try and put the I don't know if there would be a way that we could put a some kind of flag so that we will if we're going to run against a ledger or an external mediator or something of that sort, that we can uh, have a flag so that we can turn it off or on if we want to in the future, especially if also you're trying to do like I've run into that situation where you try and run the tests locally, but it's like you have a trouble with like the local running Von network or whatever, where it's a mess to have the ledger tests get those working appropriately. So I wonder if
Mm.
there's a flag that we could do for that type of problem.
Um, yeah, okay, I might need to look into that, but um, there is one actually. There's like some label that I put on those integration tests, and this is an existing label we have, some skip CI uh, label, and this is probably way too broad because I think this skip CI actually skips most of the integration tests, whereas maybe
Mm,
we want to fine grain to skip, potentially flaky ledger related tests.
yeah.
Um, yeah. Another approach maybe is don't run, don't run any of the checked ledger tests if the PR in question hasn't actually modified any of it.
Mm,
Uh,
yeah. We the those are thoughts, but also it's a hmm, how much do we expect this to be an issue? If that
yeah,
makes
yeah.
sense. Is it
Maybe,
is the juice worth the squeeze?
yes. Yeah, what do you think? Are you okay with us waiting till it is an issue to address it?
I think that's what I lean towards in this case, especially because you're mm, we don't expect our load to be high on the check side, and it's not
Mm.
like it's spinning up anything locally that a developer has to add additional dependencies for or get things set up for, like the VOD
Yeah,
network.
yeah.
So I think leaving it is okay.
Yeah. Yeah, this is maybe the one of the good parts, and I know it can be annoying to deal with Von, but one of the good parts of it is that it's a fully local environment, which we
Yep.
can't really do with Check. You can't really spin up a local, one-off node to run tests against. You sort of have to use the real thing. In our case, using the test net. I think there probably is a test in here for mainnet as well, but yeah, you sort of have to use the real thing to test it properly.
Do we want to test against their mainnet on a regular basis? Like the test net, I think that makes it's in the name, but the mainnet is more
Yeah, I think I
theoretically production.
yeah, I think I just have one place where I'm testing a mainnet vector. So it does
Which
get some coverage, the mainnet.
Okay. Which I also suppose is a good thing in that it verifies that this does also work on because you have the problem. It works on testnet, but doesn't work on mainnet. So uh
Yeah.
uh I think that's okay.
Oh. Okay, one more thing. Sorry, I'm taking up a bit of time, but one more
Oh
thing I
no,
should
it's great.
cover is so I made the checked implementation of that anon-creds read trait, right? And that anon-creds read trait is what VCX, the primary VCX crate passes around to, its holder structs when, holder has to do stuff, it'll get an instance of one of these anon-creds reads. Um, so yeah, I also implemented this trait for just what I've called currently the multi-ledger anon-creds read. Um, so basically, the idea of this is that it wraps over a collection of other anon-creds ledger reads, and
Mm,
then every time you get a call for, get schema, it'll find the appropriate reader for that schema type. So, if the
hmm
schema ID is a did checked then it'll find a reader that you've registered that is capable of handling this type of object.
Yep.
Uh, if you get a did solve or you get an unqualified, then it'll find the appropriate resolver for that, and then just proxy through to that resolver. Um, yeah.
I like the concept. One of my questions here is my first thought when you say multi-ledger, which this might have overlap, but and so maybe you are actually covering this, but does it cover the case in which I want to be able to raid a indie testnet and a indie mainnet, like Credo has implemented?
Um, as unqualified dids.
Yes, not did indie. It's a mess.
Um, no, I think it'll bite. Basically how this is working is that everything you pass in, or every time you basically you register a bunch of resolvers that you want to be existent under this multi-ledger thing. And they all have to implement this trait, which is ledger support, which is basically a trait that tells the caller whether or not they can handle that type of identifier, that type of schema ID, creddef ID, etc.
Mm, yep.
So the checked one is sort of the checked implementation of that supports trait is pretty straightforward. It's, read the identifier. Uh, is it is it a valid did URL that has the method checked? If it is, then we can handle it.
Yep.
But then for our indie VDR ledger, I had to implement that trait as well. Um, and yeah, no, I actually have a note here. But essentially, I'm when it gets a schema, it checks if it's a legacy schema, and in this case, that means it's like an unqualified schema. And
Yep.
if it is, then it returns true. Uh, Otherwise, it'll check if it starts with did solve. Um, but in the future, there might need to be did indie as well. Um, so yeah, I
So
really don't
I
know what to do there.
so I guess a clarifying question from my perspective is, does what you have now essentially just provide uh the ability to have two non-creds readers have two separate implementations essentially, and then we can determine if it's a did solve, use this one, if it's a did check, use this one,
Yeah,
essentially? Okay.
yeah.
So theoretically, in order to add multi-ledger read support, uh multi-indie ledger read support, uh
Mm.
we would have to adjust its crate to be able to handle, be able to receive, or its implementation to be able to handle multiple ledgers, essentially, which is a whole nother thing.
Yeah.
Does
So
that
yeah,
sound sane?
yeah. Like here's the construction of it, right? So you're just registering the different readers that you want to put in your multi-ledger reader. Um, and in this case, this is an indie VDR reader getting put in. And imagine normally you bootstrap this with your Genesis file path or whatever, right?
Right.
Then that might point to, your indie testnet uh or whatever Genesis you're using, and then that's what you pass in here. But what I think what you're asking is what happens if you have one of these readers, which is for, indie testnet, the other one's for indie mainnet, and they're both designed to resolve these unqualified DIDs. How do you have this multi-ledger decipher between, or this unqualified DID or resource belongs to mainnet and resolves to testnet? How do you accomplish that?
Yeah. Um,
Do you know what the
huh.
credo approach is? Is it spray and pray? Sort of if this ledger doesn't resolve, try the next one.
Yeah, there is a, if I let me see if I can find it. There is um a document that Stephen Curran put together that describes the architectural approach that Credo used to implement this, and
Mm.
essentially it is uh, contact every single ledger and see if they have it. And then based off of the responses, you're going to prioritize uh, at at initialization time. You
Mm.
provide an array, and that array is your order of preference in terms of if
Yes.
they both have a did, you're going to take the order of preference. And
Yeah.
Credo also has you indicate whether or not the ledger is a production network, so that you also prioritize production networks over test networks, for instance.
Mm. Okay.
Um,
Okay.
my me thinking about, I'm like, how do we handle doing this? The we may not want to. Like, if we could get
Yeah.
away with it, can we just do did indie? Because uh that actually sounds a lot simpler to me, because we could just then register a non-creds ledger read in the multi-ledger for this ledger, and then another one for a different ledger, and just adjust the ledger support trait somewhat so that you can pass uh well, it may not even need to adjust the trait, but have it so that the support is going to check the namespace that was
Yes.
passed as part of the did indie. Um,
Yep.
because that sounds way simpler, but the problem there is you have to support did indie.
Yeah. Yeah, and our issuers and verifiers going to use qualified dids or not. Uh, Yeah, you can imagine what it could be, right? If maybe for one of these instances of the VDR ledger read, you also, as part of the configuration, you tell it what the namespace of the indie ledger is, and then as part of this, is the did method supported? It checks, does it start with did indie self dot namespace or whatever. Um,
Yes.
that would be dreamy. But yeah.
I don't remember um if I don't remember where support for did indie is at. Do you know there whether that's something that is do you know do the ledgers is the ledger code finished, and then I guess the other part is the non creds RS piece finished to be able to do did indie?
Um, I don't know the first part, but a non-creds RS is should be good to handle any sort of identifier you throw at it, qualified or unqualified. Like for instance, here we've been passing the did checked, resource identifiers into a non-creds RS, and it's happy to handle them.
Oh, I asked a stupid question. When I said it on Creds RS, I meant Indie VDR, because that's the one that's doing the
Ah.
actual the that's the second half with the node.
So I think Indie VDR just works in terms of NIMs, right? So you've already given it a Genesis file, so it already has a set ledger that it works with, and then you just feed it a NIM. It doesn't care about did solve, did Indie, yada yada. Uh, all it knows is this is the ledger I talk to, and you give me a NIM, and I'll resolve it. And then it's up to the consumer of Indie VDR to sort of namespace those NIMs, both on the input and output. Uh, yeah.
But the I know that there was, unless I'm crazy, which is a possibility. I know that there was code that had to be changed on the indie node side to be able to support did indie. Um,
Um, okay, I'm gonna stop talking about it then because I didn't know that. There probably is more to it.
Yeah, because I would have, because that's been the holdup of why we haven't pushed to do did indie a long
Mm.
time ago, you know. So I wonder I can. mm, I think it might be because I think this is going to be relevant to work. This is going to be relevant to instance stuff here soon. Of like right now, since we're using bifold as in our app, but we're going to transition using VCX for that. Um, we have multi-ledger read support. We'll want to have that same kind of behavior, but we'll either need to implement a similar approach to Credo or use did So I will take this as a note to ask the appropriate people in the appropriate calls or in Discord or whatever have you to see where did Indy is at.
Yeah. Okay. At the minimum as well, I'll add some comment or note in here about how this is not going to handle multiple unqualified did resolve as well. Uh, and yeah, we might need to consider some of the approaches you mentioned where you have, priority configurations and things like that.
Yeah, but uh, that I slightly drilled down. It's really cool that you have added this and that it is something that exists and can be used. So that's awesome to see.
Yeah, and just for more clarity on the anonymity use case, so like in our Edge Agent SDK, we call it, it doesn't at least yet have that multi unqualified ledger support. Instead, it's just give me a single Genesis file URL when you initialize your app, and that's what I'm going to use.
Hmm.
Um, a pretty simple approach, but means I haven't had to worry about some of those issues you're describing yet. Um, yeah, when I have ran bifold before, I believe I saw what you're describing, where it's iterating through a list and trying them all, trying to find the right network. Um, and I remember not liking it, but I realize it's the best thing you can do really until we have qualified DIDs. Yeah.
Right. One, it also has other problems with it in that it is performance intensive,
Hmm.
especially did the Sovereign testnet, I want to say, because it just has that one takes forever to load on the startup connecting to
Yeah.
it. Um, like it takes forever to connect to all the ledgers where it can be noticeable uh, the amount of time that it takes. Where like that's why I implemented back when we were first doing the multi-ledger reads in Credo, I implemented it so that we would do asynchronously. So as soon as we could start, we start connecting the ledgers so that it's
Mhm.
not you don't try and accept a credential and have to wait a minute for it to connect to the ledgers. um,
Yeah. Right.
and oh, there was another thing I was going to say about it. Uh, but from a performance standpoint, it's not. Yeah, it's not great. Um, like it works, but it's not my preferred approach. Oh, the other part is that iOS has this may be resolved now, but we had significant issues in the past with iOS and ledgers, so that when you like put the in certain versions of React Native, if you backgrounded the app it would crash the app while the ledgers were connected. So we would try and disconnect the ledgers as soon as the app was backgrounded and then reconnect once you reopen the app. It was a absolute mess.
Uh, yeah.
But
I mean,
that's a
there's
indie issue, ZMQ problem.
yeah, I was gonna say there's so much going on when you're connected to a ledger from an iOS device. You have these sockets open with them. You're using ZMQ, which uses weird port numbers, and I've heard
Hmm.
people having issues at airports with ZMQ
Ah,
trying to punch through firewalls and things like that.
yep.
It's going through Rust. That's already a big step. And then that Rust is calling onto some C binary that hopefully you have statically linked with your app. There's so much going on.
Yeah, the amount of layers to go, especially when you add the React Native part where it's like, especially
Yeah,
the old
yeah,
way that it was React
true.
Native to Swift to Objective-C to C to
Yeah,
Rust, like it was a that tech stack was really a stack.
yeah, yeah.
I'm
All right.
curious if we will as a community end up implementing a uh what's the word? Oh, we were thinking about doing a DIGCOM do requests to like a NDVDR type proxies that can make
Mm,
requests on the behalf of people, and you do that over DIGCOM to the proxy to make that.
mm,
Um,
mm, mm.
Now that I think about it, that won't actually be too hard to do either.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds similar to like the proxy they have in here, right? Have you looked at this
Oh yeah.
before?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. But yeah, over DidCom would be even cooler.
Because
Mm,
thinking of this out loud, if in did Indy isn't actually supported, I might go that route to build a agent that can be a Indy VDR over DIGCOM agent that just wraps the Indy VDR proxy service,
mm.
um, and have it be able to handle talking to the ledgers as well as multiple ledgers, where it will do it'll handle that rather than trying to hamstring that into VCX here. Have it be handled from a as a proxy strategy.
Yeah, yeah.
I like that.
Love your thinking. Yeah, that's a good idea. Push it onto the server side. Um, yeah, the server could have like caching as well of like what resources it's found where,
Hmm.
perhaps.
Hmm.
Um, it doesn't have to re-scan the whole list of 10 networks or whatever.
Uh-huh. Well, and it can just maintain the connection to the ledgers because that's one of the biggest problems on the mobile side is the that initial startup of connecting to the ledger. And especially if you have a lot of nodes and or absent nodes in the Genesis transactions, it that is the part where there's the biggest amount of friction among the fact that they're unqualified. That is the biggest one, I suppose. But the second biggest one is the startup time.
Yeah, I like it.
Cool. This has been very insightful. Thank you.
Good. No, thank you as well. Um, okay. Well, uh, long story short, I'll at least add a note here about what the capability and where we might get
Yes.
hurt. Cool. Okay. I've taken way too long on this one. Okay, James, over to you.
Ah, yes.
Where do you want to take this?
So the update on the pickup protocol v4 is that yesterday I talked to the user group and got that discussion brought back up on that. Ariel ended up having some times he actually put some additional comments on it that are good. So um, I am anticipating that this will take another little bit to get uh, completed and merged in. But progress is happening here again. uh, I think I will try and stay on this of uh, probably next week. I'll see if I can maybe get that wrapped up. Otherwise, it'll happen in the new year.
Yeah, it's good that it was picked back up. Haha.
Yes, yes. Um, so that's that brief update there. From the framework side of things, I've been making progress here, and I think one of the pieces that I wanted to, mm, I was thinking about our error handling strategy, and um, the rough theory that I have. come up with architecture, I suppose you could say, is trying to have the goals of it being is that it is specific so that a developer can specifically match to uh, reasoning. So instead of having the ability to, from a VCX developer perspective, be able to have a generic error uh, enum type uh, that you can pass any message string to, having have a designated error for each error, if that makes sense, so that it is more specific. Um, I don't know if that made any sense. I can share my screen if that would be helpful also.
Yeah. Let me stop sharing.
We'll see if it
Yeah,
helps.
I think that makes sense. So that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to have different error variants or exception variants.
Yeah. So for instance, right now, so my thought process is have like a specific storage error here of duplicate record, but rather
Mm.
than not have a generic that this can get past a string that gets passed along. I wonder if I have actually, I can pull up there's actually a variety of places that we handle errors in VCX in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
um, but I guess this is an example where these messages are, or this error is defined in that you can define a message on it so that it does end up being more generic in that uh, it is less specific, being able to do a match case. You'd have to match against the message string, for instance.
Mm.
Um, so maybe I can. This is helping me because I've realized because I started writing down my architectural thoughts for the whole framework, and what I should do here, you've helped me as I've started talking about this, is I'm like, I should demonstrate what I don't want to have be happening and what I do. I think that help in communicating my thoughts with this.
Yeah.
Um,
You're talking about you don't want consumers to be trying to parse error messages to, determine what kind of error it is.
exactly. Yep.
Yeah. I agree. It's a big red flag when you have to do that, in my opinion.
hmm The other piece from the error handling perspective that I was thinking is to try and have one of the things that we have done in other places in the frame or in VCX is to do a converter of saying, okay, if we have a Serde um, error, for instance, we do a conversion. So
Yeah.
generally, all Serde errors are going to become a VCX error. Um, one of my thoughts here is to uh, rather than do this, we have something where we have, for instance, a uh, deserialization error, for instance, in our framework, and then uh, if we run into a Serde error, we then throw our own framework error on top of it. So we essentially catch any dependency errors and throw a framework specific error in front of that that is gives context, for instance, of like uh, what was the example that I had done here? Um, so for instance, if we were trying to connect and we ran into uh, this was the example I gave down here of rather than throwing a Serde deserialization failed, we would want to say, okay, throw an error that corresponds to we were unable to parse the inbound didcom message.
Yeah.
Um, and then you should either be able to do a trace, go up the stack to be able to determine that it was a Serde issue, or do a be able to call dot source to be able to get the underlying error. That's
Mm.
kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah. If can you go back to the from implementation you had up?
This one.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, okay. So yeah, what you're saying is if you just have this converter and you're doing question mark on your SerDes conversions to quickly convert it,
Hmm.
then it throws, a SerDes or serialization specific error. However, you're missing the context of what you were trying to deserialize and things like that. And then the
Yep.
consumer has to try and interpret the SerDes error itself.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I think I need to probably do better at this myself. Because obviously this is very nice having the from trait, and then you can just question mark operator to,
It makes
quickly
it
get things
very
done.
easy.
Yeah. But you're talking
Which,
about something where you have like a dot map error, and then you pass in some function which you can provide more context into, maybe.
yes. Yep.
Yeah.
That is my thought. So, and my thought process is to try and do that while also trying to make it not overly burdensome on the VCX developer side, because I recognize that this is really nice, but it has downsides to it that I think would be nice to mitigate, you know? Um,
Mm.
so that's my general thought process when it comes to error handling, is to try and set up the framework itself in a way that uh, encourages us to be specific in our error handling, uh, versus I guess sweeping under the rug, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Okay. So you're going to try out this approach in the framework.
Yeah,
And then if we find it to be very beneficial, would you want to sort of try trinkle this concept into other parts of VCX?
I think it would make sense. Um,
Yeah.
I am the most yeah, I would start with the framework and then I would move into the other parts of VCX. Um, my primary goal right now is to make the framework the most friendly and easy to use, especially because it's from a fresh start. It will be easier to start with the mm, the vision we're going for, versus having to fix everything that's already here in the repo. Um,
Yeah.
doesn't mean that we are not going to, but it's a uh, I'm not trying to fry the whole fish at the same time. So short answer is yes.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I like it.
um, and so that was one of the pieces that I wanted to run by you. And then I think uh, I guess a brief overview of how I was thinking to structure some of this, or I have been structuring this. I did a little bit of re-architecture, but um, is to break the framework up into essentially modules, services, and registries. Module is a little bit of a bad name because that is what Rust calls everything. So but I haven't
Mhm.
been able to come up with a better name.
Yeah.
Um, the thought process here being is that one of the things with the first approach that I took for the framework was um, having this framework, Aries framework VCX, and then it has these services on it, right? I
Hmm.
immediately ran into this issue of oh, the connection service needs to talk to the mediation service so it can handle mediated connections.
Hmm.
Uh, but then the mediation service needs to talk to the connection service, because it needs to, when you go to connect to the mediator, you have to establish a DIGCOM connection, right? So that's a cyclical dependency and was really gross. So I stopped and took a step back and said, "Oh, this from an architectural perspective is a problem." So I split this out to say, "Okay, let's have uh, as much as possible, have uh, everything be a module that doesn't have in memory or persistent data, so that it doesn't need to be, it's just function, it's a functional style, so that you can call this as much as you want. It can be parallelized, which means you have scalability. um, and so that was the thought process, but some things do need to have some in-memory state, like a HTTP server, for instance, that has persistence that needs to happen for while the service is running. um, and so want to be careful in having these, but having less of them makes it a lot easier to work with, of having interdependency problems. uh, and then last thing being the registry, which is, or registries that takes in long-term data, so your classic database,
Yep.
and having it be just uh, read and write data versus doing any other operations, meaning I don't have to have a registry that talks to registry. A registry doesn't have to talk to another registry or any other way, which means even though it is initialized, there's a single there's less cyclical dependencies. Uh, and theoretically, this is something that can be scaled up using traditional means for uh, horizontal scaling, But
Mhm.
uh, that's my rough thought process for how to organize some of this stuff. Um, is have modules, services, and registries, and they all kind of work together, but trying to decouple the interdependency, because that was one of the other things, is that uh, testing things when they rely on each other to that same degree gets a lot harder when they are initialized, from in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think these layers make sense to me. Um, yeah, have you started trying this approach?
Yes, I've been working on so since I kind of restarted after I was running into issues trying to implement mediation in regards to connections. um, what I've been working on most recently has been the trying to do the messaging module, which leads to, oh, I need to be able to store my DIDs. So, okay, I'm going to create the DID registry, which means I
Mm.
have to do the storage trait, if you will. Um, and so that's what I have been working on, and that should be done here fairly shortly. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, this makes sense. Yeah, I generally do similar stuff. It doesn't matter, but I'll use like the word repository instead of registry for like those things where its sole purpose is just to dump data and take data out persistently, and their traits, so you can swap them out for SQL or ASCII records, yada yada. Um,
yep, that's what my approach here was, to have well, one, a trait for the storage itself, and a trait for what kind of record to be able to store.
yeah,
Um, and
yeah,
I need to I need to adjust this trait some, because what I did was I implemented a in-memory storage that just uses a hash map.
yeah,
um, but I was starting to look at using the ASCII record storage, and I'm like, there's things in here that I'm going to need that I don't already have, for, like, I need to be able to search by uh, a tag or some kind of metadata. So being able to search for, like, because I need to be able to retrieve DIDs by their keys.
yeah.
Um, so I need to add a little bit here in regards to that, but 100%.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, extending that record trait with some tagging capabilities and things like that. Yeah, cool.
Do you have any recommendations for a better name than module? Because that conflicts with Rust modules, so I don't want that to be confusing.
Um, hmm. Do you have an example of one? Like, have you written up one of these modules?
Um,
In
that I'm in progress on that, but the I might be missing some code here, but and it's also hidden because of this line here. But for instance, the did registry, so being able to oh, that's a registry, not a module. Uh, I did go down into from here, like actually listing what
yeah,
this that might be what you're asking about.
yeah. Okay, and it differs from a service in that a service may have to hold things in memory.
Yes, which is a fairly small distinction, but it means that a module can be called uh there you don't have to have a reference to it. It can be called from multiple places, multiple you don't have to have a reference to it, which is really nice. uh, while the service, uh, that is where you have to have it has to be initialized because it has to hold on to data, which means that there's a single one this piece of code has to hold on to has control over XYZ thing, if that makes sense.
Yes. Okay, wait, so your modules, do you think it'll be to the point where they're like just static functions?
Yes.
Oh, cool.
My
Very
thought
interesting.
process is that they can take in, for instance, like the messaging module, it will take in the did register a reference to the did registry, taking a reference to the um yeah, the connection mod. It'll take in the appropriate references that it needs to be able to do it. But that means it's completely functional on that you don't have to initialize it and then have a reference at runtime for it.
Yes. Yeah.
That's the theory.
Yeah. Um, and who's using the modules? Is it the services that are using the modules?
Um, I would expect that some of the services would use the modules, and the modules would then also be this is the probably the primary entry point for most of the end developers. So if they want to actually initiate a connection, they're going to call a function on the module and pass it a reference to the the appropriate references to the framework or the to the did registry or whatever needs to be passed to it.
Okay, cool. Um, sorry, no, I don't have a better name for now.
Cool. That is completely fair. This is a little bit also of the you're seeing into the inner works of the madness of my brain, you know.
Yeah, no,
um
this is cool. Yeah, no pressure to do this, but are you do you like your UML diagrams? Have you considered making a UML to try describe some of these ideas?
yes, I had um uh this is what I was putting together when I was trying to figure out what the I was trying to work through how best to model it with when I was trying to deal with the cyclical dependency issues. And I this is what I think this was what I ended. Moral of the story is yes, this was what I was working on, and I think I need to I think that will be really helpful for communicating the ideas over just words.
Yeah. Yeah, because yeah, it's pretty quick to identify cycles when you try and map it out. But yeah, no pressure to do it, but if you do, I'd be very interested in seeing it.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think that um I want to there's more that I want to do from the documentation perspective to because I think that having a strong architecture out of the gate will help from a mm, the success of the framework, especially because architecture degrades over time. So having it be good from the start will help uh, uh, give the runway for as that starts to degrade as we add features and complexity. Uh,
Yeah.
architecture is the easiest when things are simple, but as you add complexity, it starts to and time it breaks down.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. But I like that you made up that document and trying to define these sections. Yeah, I'll let you know if I think of another name for modules, but
Cool. So,
yeah.
uh, I'm hoping to, as I said last time, I guess the developer estimates of it. I'm hoping to reach a good milestone here soon, so that we can do like an initial version and whatnot. But developer estimates uh, as you know, so
Yeah, I mean, yeah, no rush on my end. Yeah, keep on keeping on. It's looking good.
sweet. Sorry,
Cool.
I also we went a bit over, but it's really good conversation. So
Hmm. Yeah, no worries at all. Um, were you going to say something else? I just had one more thing, if not.
no, I think I was that's what I had.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing. I was just gonna ask as well. There was a message in Discord from one of the instant guys about Unify.
Uh
Um, are
yep.
you guys still collaborating on that?
Yes, we are
Yep.
still collaborating on that. I would have um uh I am uh your help with them is appreciated, but also definitely not required. Like that's the thing where I could have tried to help some there with what he was asking about and stuff. So, a short answer is yes. I'm still working with them, and um I'm primarily focusing on the framework right now while they're trying to work on the Unify piece to get that working completely. So
Yeah. I was just calling it out because yeah, you might be able to help them more than I'm able to help them, because it relates to the framework stuff. Um,
yep.
yeah. Anyway, I tried to answer
I
it.
appreciate it.
Cool.
Awesome.
All right. That's all I got. Anything else from you?
Uh No, I think that's it. Oh, other than I'm guessing we're not gonna do the 24th, so probably not another call until come January, unless we wanted to do one in a week, but that also doesn't leave much. I don't know if we'll have much to talk about in a week, so
No, let me make a note. Yeah, let's skip the one in 2 weeks. And yeah, we'll see if we're back for whatever the next one is after that.
looks
Uh,
like the 7th is the next 2 weeks, so 4 weeks would be the 7th.
um,
Oh, and we wouldn't even want to do 3 weeks either, because 3 weeks is the 31st. So like that's also another holiday. Cool.
yeah. All right. So do you think you'll be back on the 7th?
Yes, I will be back. Are you going to be doing holidays still?
I'm not sure what my plans are. But
Ah,
anyway, we'll stay in touch.
uh, we'll figure it out.
Cool. All right. Well, happy holidays. Hope you have a good
Happy
break.
holidays.
And yeah, keep in touch.
Yep. Thank you, George.
All good. Thank you. Thanks for your time. Bye bye.
See ya.